Hey, what's up everybody? It's A-Bomb here, and how you guys doing this afternoon? Alrighty then. Alright, so we are here with a list of the 50 Bioware romances from the big three games, which include, and it's down in the description below, but in case you don't want to go and like look at the description or whatever, it is Star Wars KotOR 1 and 2, the Mass Effect saga being the first trilogy and Andromeda, and then of course the Dragon Age trilogy. No rants, no not needed information before. We're just gonna jump straight in with our honorable mention list. I did debate putting more people on this honorable mention list, but I kept it down to 5, and everybody else I just kind of counted as like a random sex option, because for the most part that's what these guys are anyways. But since we're doing honorable mentions, we're going to do like 50.5 and up, and then we'll go into the actual list. So the 50.5 is Aveline Velen, which is technically not a romanceable character, and I debated counting her on the list, but since you can actually flirt with her and get a kiss with her if you play your hand correctly, I did actually count it, although being that it is inevitably going to end in heartbreak for you, as she does end up marrying Guardsman Donick, whether you support that or not. That is why she is at 50.5. Going on to 50.4, we've got Mira from Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, which is a character that is only able to be recruited by a light side character, and also only able to be romanced by a male, or at least flirted with by a male. Much like Aveline, trying to flirt with her doesn't seem to go anywhere. I do believe that this was a bit more to like content cut than actual, like Aveline's case. But it could just be that Mira is genuinely uninterested in the exile. But it kind of seems to lock itself out no matter what you do, even if you make her a Jedi. That being said, I did count her on the list because you can flirt with her. You can probably figure out why most of these guys are honorable mentions. Going into 50.3 is Javik from Mass Effect 3, which is a one-night stand that you can have as a female shepherd, in which case it's a funny little dialogue which Javik will express discomfort and overall remorse for having slept with a human. Moving on from Javik to another one-night stand available for FemShep at the same party, James Vega. These are both only available for a shepherd that is not involved in a romance, whereas James Vega won't express as much discomfort with it. He does express that, pretty much it was a one-night stand, but he does make you eggs in the morning, so at least he's charming enough to stay around and make you eggs. That being said, we're going to move into the 50.1 spot and the final honorable mention before moving into the actual list. That being Talus from Dragon Age 2, which ultimately kiss but not romance, even if you have not romanced somebody throughout the game. Subsequently, however, you can get the kiss even if you have romanced somebody, and it doesn't really take an overall effect on anything except your lover, if present when you kiss her, will express a little bit of jealousy. That being said, I also included the sexualities of all these characters as a little side note. Mira, Javik, and James can only be done as straight. However, Aveline and Talis can both be flirted with and kissed as a female. Then there's a whole bunch of random sex that you can have throughout the course of at least Dragon Age and Mass Effect. I don't know particularly about Star Wars, but I do know that starting as early as the first installments of each game, you can start having random sex with a lot of NPCs. And I didn't want to include literally every random encounter on this list, which is why we shortened it down to relevant companions and all that. That being said, we are going to move into the actual list, with our bottom being Morinth at the bottom. Now, the reason that Morinth is at the bottom should not surprise anybody, considering the fact that her romance path is not canon, considering that it leads to Shepard's death if you actually go through with it. You will go up to your cabin and have sex with Morinth, which will result in a game over screen. Not surprising if you actually bothered to pay attention to her lore, and even if you think that her killing you is worth it, which obviously definitely not, considering you get a game over screen and it's not like a canon death. You also have to think that Morinth is also a killer. When you actually get the mission where you can get Morinth instead of Samara, you're hunting her down on the pretenses that she killed an aspiring artist whose mother is devastated that her daughter was killed in such a manner. And Morinth doesn't really seem to show any remorse for this killing. As a matter of fact, she feels kind of angry that her mother thinks that she needs to be stopped. And whereas I do admit that Morinth has some points as a character, you can feel bad for her. She didn't really ask to be born the way she was, but the fact is that she is, and unlike her sisters, which stay at the monastery, I know, kind of a boring life, but the alternative is she's going out and snuffing out a whole bunch of lives for her own personal benefit. And so it's kind of like, do you think it's worth the lives of all these people in the galaxy that she's snuffing out? In my opinion, no. And considering the fact that she does not show up in Mass Effect 3, it just ultimately goes down to Morinth just was not worth saving, and ultimately really worth not romancing. That being said, we are going to move on to Reyes from Mass Effect Andromeda. Now, some of you might be wondering who this guy is, and if you are wondering, I wouldn't blame you. He's part of a side quest. However, I've never actually had this romance myself. I only learned about it while doing research for this list, so any information I'm giving you about this guy, please correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that he is straight and only romanceable by a female writer. Also only romanceable if you side with him instead of the other person. I don't even remember who that is, but it's a woman. And I think it's kind of funny, I didn't read anything about her being romanceable, just him. So, but anyway, in addition to being just kind of like a side character at best, Reyes is also a criminal, which doesn't make him much better than Morinth in terms of likability and romanceability. And since Andromeda It's kind of one of those games. It's really hard to progress in the story anyway, given how the combat is so stale. Reyes is just on the short end of the stick there, and earns himself a spot at 49. Now, we're going to move on to Jacob Taylor from Mass Effect 2. Now, I do think that the girls got a bit of the short end of the stick in terms of the romances in Mass Effect 2. We'll get into that in the course of this list, but we're going to start with one of the reasons being that Jacob Taylor is a romance option that doesn't really count past Mass Effect 2. So unless you had a romance option in Mass Effect 1 that you want to continue romancing in Mass Effect 3 and don't want to hurt, Jacob Taylor's romance just doesn't really even make sense, considering the fact that he ends up with another girl following the events of Mass Effect 2. And if you had romanced him in that game, the most you get is more or less kind of a sorry, I'm with someone else now. It ultimately kind of feels a bit bland, and since Jacob Taylor isn't an interesting character to begin with, it really gives him the short end of the romance stick. Now, I feel like Jacob Taylor could have been worked a little bit better as a romance if they had actually bothered to keep it around in Mass Effect 3, but Jacob Taylor was barely present in Mass Effect 3, let alone his romance. That being said, he just doesn't earn a spot higher than 48. Moving on to 47, we have Diana Allers, which is a reporter in Mass Effect 3, who you can more or less have a fling with and nothing else. You can flirt with her every investigation, which will eventually lead to her more or less offering sex to Shepard for a one-time quickie that is never to be spoken of again. And so it is. If you actually go through with it, you do in fact have your one-night stand with Diana Allers that gets buried, never brought up again, and ultimately it does not unlock you the romance achievement. So counting Diana Allers as an actual romance and not as a I lost my train of thought for a second, and not as a fling is a bit in the air. But at least she has a little bit more grounding than Jacob Taylor, and the fact that she's just keeping her things secret and she's not just full on ignoring that it happened. That being said, Diana Allers is romanceable by both a female and male Shepard, and I do believe I forgot to mention this with Morinth, but Morinth is also romanceable by a female and male Shepard. Not that I believe that matters too much. Moving into another character whose romance just kind of seems to fizz out, Carrie Tavessa, and I don't know if I'm actually saying her name correctly, but I believe that's how it's said. She is more or less kind of like a reskinned Diana Allers, to be quite honest. She's a reporter in Mass Effect Andromeda who Ryder can flirt with occasionally, and ultimately unlock a romance with. And what really makes it just kind of like irrelevant is the fact that even if Ryder is romancing somebody else, Carrie can be romanced, and she more or less just doesn't change much if you romance her. It's kind of a really bland romance, especially since there are a couple really good ones in this game. Having her as your go-to just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense unless you desperately want to romance an Asari. because the Asari were pretty popular in Mass Effect, but I mean, come on, she's no Liara by far. She is romanceable by both a male and female writer, though, so if you want to take a crack at that, you can go ahead. We are going to move into the number 45 spot, which is Samara the Justicar. Now, like most Asari, if not all Asari, Samara is bisexual and can be romanced by a male and or female shepherd. No, not and. What? I just threw myself off there. Ignore that little stupid comment. Samara can be romanced by a male or female shepherd, like most Asari. However, it does not unlock an achievement for it, which I believe is called the Pompadour, like it is in Dragon Age Origins and Inquisition, but I'm not entirely sure. Anyway, whatever the actual romance is called, achievement, my bad, whatever the actual achievement is called, you don't get it by romancing Samara. However, you do get a nice hug and kiss, and Samara isn't a terribly uninteresting character. It's just the fact that her character romance falls so far flat that it's hard to put her higher. I really wish in the Legendary Edition that Samara would have been like an actual romance. Make it to where she's like because besides, if you know, you can count Kelly Chambers, but companion wise, Mass Effect 2 did not have a bisexual companion, which Jack was a mixed opportunity because in her dialogue she admits that she is bisexual. However, a female shepherd does not have a chance of romancing Jack even in the Legendary Edition. It is one of the few things that they did not actually touch up on, Samara's romance also being one of them. That being said, we are going to move into Michael, aka the Disciple from Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2. He is only romanceable and even recruitable by a female exile, and what makes Michael so low on the list is that if you are playing through as a female, Atten is just a way better romance, and ultimately a way more prominent romance, whereas Michael does have a couple scenes where he does seem to like be interested in the exile. They're not as interesting as Atten's kind of like humorous attempts to woo her. And also, since Blizes is kind of thrown in your face as a romance for both a female and male exile, Michael just really falls flat here, and doesn't have a terrible amount to go with. He probably would have been a little bit higher up on the list had he had a little bit more engaging of a personality, but Michael suffers from the bland male character. I messed that up. Bland male character stereotype, which we will be touching up on a lot here in the bottom reaches of this list. Anyway, he is probably the epitome of that, considering that there are better options, and unlike the KotOR 1 romances, KotOR 2's romances are a bit ambiguous. They are left up in the air. You can just have more or less a preference rather than an actual locked-in romance. There's never actually a confirmation or a kiss thing like there is in KotOR 1. Enough about Michael though. We are going to move into Tom Rainier, also known as Blackwall, your companion. He is a straight companion who leads you to believe he is a Grey Warden. However, this is not the case. He is actually a man who was traveling with the Grey Warden and meant to be recruited as one. However, the Grey Warden in question, Blackwall, died along the way, prompting the man, Tom Rainier, to take Blackwall's name and identity and just kind of roam around as a pretend warden. However, without actually having done the ritual, there is still much about being a warden that Blackwall does not know, likely including how an archdemon is actually killed. What makes his romance really uninteresting, despite the fact that the case of mistaken identity is a little bit interesting, is the fact that Blackwall doesn't stand out. Whereas a lot of your companions have quirks and personalities that stand out, Blackwall is by far the most uninteresting of them all. He's a stereotypical nice guy. He stereotypically likes very wardeny things like killing darkspawn and finding warden caches. And his storyline makes it to where even that nice guy thing is kind of called into question as, is this really Tom Rainier, or is he trying to be Blackwall? That being said, his romance is kind of a bit of a mess and a flop, and it doesn't hold much candle. Moving on to number 42, which is Kelly Chambers. Now, Kelly Chambers is a bisexual and the only bisexual character from Mass Effect 2. However, just because she is a bisexual character from Mass Effect 2 does not mean that she had a very good running. With Kelly, her path is one of those ones that get blocked out if you are romancing somebody else during the events of Mass Effect 2, and the payout for your loyalty and not flirting with any of the more well-developed characters is that Kelly Chambers ultimately doesn't keep her romance with Shepard because she leaves the crew of the Normandy following the events of Mass Effect 2, and whereas you can find her in Mass Effect 3 and possibly even patch things up with her and, I guess like lock in the romance. I don't know, because to be honest, every time I play Mass Effect 2, there's just so many good romances to choose from. It's really hard to just go with Kelly, so I never have. And it's surprising because I'm a romance buff and I usually take every path. I've never taken Kelly's, and even when I did do one path, I think. I don't know if I'm pretty sure I stuck with it, but I didn't following the events of Mass Effect. Going into Mass Effect 3, I just continued the romance I had from Mass Effect 1 and just kind of ditched Kelly. But I believe you actually can patch things up with her. That being said, I don't think it actually locks you in as her, as a companion, not a companion, as a romance. It doesn't get you the achievement, and it doesn't ultimately have much standing in terms of like mattering. It is kind of sad because Kelly Chambers really could have been Samantha Trainer from Mass Effect 3, which is higher up on this list, but she was just kind of handled a little poorly, and as good of a game as Mass Effect 2 is, there were a couple things that were handled poorly. Kelly being one of them, the boss fight being another. But we aren't here to talk about the boss fight. Instead, we are going to move on to number 41, and it's kind of funny because there's only one bisexual romance in Mass Effect 2. We've got the vice versa with Dragon Age 2. Sebastian Vale is the only character that is not bisexual in Mass Effect 2. He can only be romanced by a female Hawk. And what makes him rank so low on the list is, for starters, being a DLC character. His character isn't deeply interwoven into the story. He's more or less a background character who doesn't offer a whole lot. Secondly, he suffers from the boring male stereotype. He just doesn't really offer a whole lot of personality. And thirdly, with him being a straight romance, it also takes out that whole, like, at least everybody was bisexual from Dragon Age 2. So with all those being like a factor, Sebastian just really gets pulled down to a low point. He ultimately could have had a little bit more going for him had he been available in the original game, even if he was straight. But the fact that he is only available as a DLC companion, it just really hurts his character and ultimately ranks him only as high as 41. Going into number 40, we have our first set gay character, and that is Gil. He is from Mass Effect Andromeda. Now the reason that Gil is at 40 and not higher is because things can get a little bit dicey, considering the fact that he has a wife and child, or I guess an ex-wife and child. And so it would kind of be like living a poly family, which, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with, but it's definitely not everybody's cup of tea. And considering that Gil is more or less a side character, he's a guy on the ship, it just doesn't hold a whole lot of candle. At least he has a little bit more substance than Carrie Tavessa, and he does have a lot more of an intriguing character than characters like Sebastian and Jacob, and even Reyes, I would go to argue. Definitely Michael and Blackwall. But it's just not enough to pull him up higher than in the romance list. Now you could disagree with me, but given the complexity of his romance, I think it would be best to leave him at 40 and move on to 39, where we have Vyz's Mar. Now, the reason that Vyz's Mar is at number 39 is, despite the fact that she is romanceable by female and male exile, she's just very annoying. And you may disagree with that, but the fact that, like, you can't go up to her and just talk with her and not have her like, I owe you this, my life is yours, my master this, it just gets a little repetitive. I do think that she is an intriguing character, but she didn't have quite the dialogue span that I think that she should have. And I think that she really should have been able to grow as a character and not just be like your loyal little lapdog. However, it is interesting also, and the fact that you could view this on another side and the fact that Vysa's Mar is probably one of the most fiercely loyal romance options out there. She would be willing to go as far as to die for the player character, and does express her feelings to the player no matter what. And if you deny her, she will ultimately reveal that you don't feel the same about her. She can kind of sense that. But I don't know, if she would have been a little less like player dependent and a little more independent, she definitely would have been higher up on the list. That being said, we are going to move in to number 38, which is Steve Cortez. Now, there's a couple things that hurt Steve being higher up on the list. One of which being, and it hurt Samantha too, but at least Samantha had a couple things going for her. Now, we'll get into that. But with Steve, he was not available until the third game, and unlike Samantha, he is not in a particularly like easy access location. Yeah, you can go down to the pit sometimes, but if you don't want to talk to James or change out your loadout or whatever, or you're just focusing on the story, you don't go around Steve a whole lot. And what really sells Steve's like romance being low on the list for me, and again, you guys could disagree, but the fact that Steve is coping with having lost you know, somebody, to me it seems like Steve's trying to move on a little bit too fast. He literally just lost somebody and is now already taking comfort in another person. Now, you could see that in a good light, like Steve is not being tied down by the loss of his lover. He's getting back out there and having fun. It just, I don't know. Steve definitely, trust me, would have been higher up on the list if not for the fact that I just felt like the whole recent loss of a lover made the whole situation a little awkward. That being said, we are going to jump in to a character who was originally straight in their first appearance, but later returned as bisexual, and that is Caden Alenko. Now, Caden Alenko was only available as a female romance in Mass Effect 1, with it being pretty cut and dry in terms of who you could romance in Mass Effect 1. There was one female romance, one female straight romance, one male straight romance, and then there was one bisexual romance for both of them, obviously. Anyway, however, with Caden being brought in as bisexual in Mass Effect 3, it did kind of irk me because it did kind of seem like it came out of nowhere. And it was Caden specifically who came out as bisexual. Ashley Williams' sexuality was still straight. She was not able to be romanced by a female had you like waited long enough. And to me, that it just kind of seemed a little bit weird. They never really clarified why Caden went from straight to bisexual in the third game. And him kind of suffering from the bland male stereotype really hurt his romance, which might be why they added the whole like romanceable by a male thing, because at least then like male characters can kind of cling to him. But ultimately, Caden Alenko just didn't have enough character to really pull him up higher on the list. Going into yet another character suffering from the bland male character stereotype is Carth Onasi. Now, Carth Onasi is a romance that is available in Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. He is able to be flirted with early on as a female, and later has like dialogue that kind of hints that he and her might have like a stronger connection. Although, as far as I know, and maybe I've just never unlocked it, there is no kiss scene between Carth and the Revan character, like there is with Bastila and Revan, and there is, as far as I know, no love confession like there is with Juhani and a female Revan. That being said, the kind of flirting thing is a little bit nice. However, he does have Steve's problem in the fact that he did lose somebody, and it kind of hurts. It kind of makes it a little bit awkward. However, Carth has had a lot more time to deal with his loss. His son has actually had time to grow into a fully grown man by this point, so it has been many, many years ago. That being said, if Carth would have been confirmed as a romanceable character, you know, had a kiss thing like with Bastila, or had been a little bit more prominent, or just like not been such a jerk, you know, in the latter part of the games, he would have made it higher up on the list. And I do want to point out that it's kind of funny that Caden and Carth are right next to each other, because they were voiced by the same voice actor, which he did amazing work. I believe it or not, I actually do like Carth as a companion. He especially, and it was the voice acting that really sold it for me. Carth's voice, there's just something about it that was relaxing. And again, with Caden's, it was the same deal, but I grew up with KotOR, so KotOR is a little bit more close to my heart. Anyway, we're going to move on to our number 35 spot, which is Avila Qajar. Now, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but she is a romanceable companion, and I am not going to try to say the name of the alien race, because I am not played Andromeda enough to actually like have it memorized. But she is romanceable by a male writer, and what makes her not go as far on the listings is she might have been a little bit higher up on the list. Granted, not much higher, but she would have made it a little bit higher up on the list had she not retconned all the work that you did, essentially, to romance her. After doing everything you can to try to like earn her affections, she will more or less put it off as like a not now but maybe later type deal, ultimately leading in like the utter disappointment and why did I even do a romance path when I'm ending up single anyway. However, you can view it as a sign of maturity and the fact that she is focusing on her work and not wanting her like personal life to get in the middle of that. So you could be 50-50 on this. For me, it was kind of like you know, whereas it does kind of make her a more mature character, as a romance option, it does kind of leave a void in you. I guess is how I want to put that. We're gonna move on to number 34, which is a companion that I loved again, because of voice acting. Only this time I loved the voice actor so much that honestly the romance probably would have been much slower had it not have been voiced by Grey Del. To be honest, I can't even pronounce her name, but she's a big part of my childhood. She voiced Daphne Blake from Scooby-Doo, which I'm a big Scooby-Doo fan. She voiced Vicky from Fairly Odd Parents, and I love Fairly Odd Parents. And I could go on and on and on about characters that she has voiced that were part of my childhood. But there was one day that I was watching the credits of Star Wars Knights 2, and I didn't even realize up until I watched the credits that Brianna, the handmaiden, which is also one of my favorite companions overall, even before I knew about this, is actually voiced by her as well. And I love her romance with the exile simply because of her naivety and the fact that she's kind of willing to give up everything that she knew just for this romance. I felt like she had a lot more character than Michael did. With the name reveal, it was a lot more important too, because it was the handmaiden really accepting that she is no longer like a servant of Atris. She is her own individual person. She is Brianna. And that, to me, was a lot better of a reveal than the disciple playing coy with his name. And, like I said, with her being voiced by Grey, it sold me on so many levels. If this was a personal ranking list, she would have been higher up, but I did have to. I'm trying to be fair here. This is overall quality, and because of the quality, I can't justify her being any higher up, considering that it does not end in like a kiss scene or whatever. The most you get is kind of a duel where you play as the handmaiden and she is dueling Atris on behalf of yourself, and out of love, she'll call out that she's in love with you. And when you go to her rescue, she'll express an even more like tender, loving side. That being said, I don't know if I mentioned this already or not, but I am going to restate it. Brianna is Michael's opposite, and that means that she's only recruitable and thus only romanceable by a male exile. Moving on to 33, we have Scout Harding. Now, Scout Harding, again, is one of those romances that would have been much, much higher had it would have been like fleshed out a little bit more, but sadly the people that made Dragon Age Inquisition did not like decide to make her an official romance, which I am both disappointed in but also kind of excited, because it does mean that Scout Harding is available as a companion and possible romance in further games, and that, to me, with Dreadwolf right around the corner, I would just love to see Scout Harding return as a companion and romanceable character. She was definitely one of the best parts of Inquisition. Getting into her Inquisition romance, it's more or less just kind of a little bit of flirting that can only be made quote-unquote official by you not romancing any companions. or your advisors. And that being said, Scout Harding doesn't give you the achievement for romance either. However, in one of the DLCs, which I don't know which one it is, whether it's the Descent, the Jaws of Harkin, or the Trespasser, but they do confirm, like, it is quote-unquote official in that DLC. But again, with the way it's set up, I could see where they could write it to where, like, Scout Harding ended up moving on. We are going to move into number 32, which is Colin Rutherford. He is a straight non-companion who is only romanceable by a human and elf character. No Kunari, no dwarf, no males. What makes Colin interesting is the fact that he has been in all 3 Dragon Age games and yet never been a companion in any of the. And makes me hope in a way that Colin returns for Dragon Age Dreadwolf, because I would love to see him finally become a companion. This guy has been around and had such a prominent name in all 3 games, and yet you have never been able to, like, take him around with you. That's a bit of a crime. And, like, he definitely could have replaced Blackwall both as a romanceable companion and as an actual, like, genuine companion with a good story. I'm not going to touch too much more into Colin because he slightly suffers from the boring male stereotype, but he does make up for that, and the fact that he has been in every one of the games and still managed to remain relevant throughout all 3 of them. He's not completely, like, in your face, but he's not completely, like, in the shadows either. He is definitely one of Dragon Age's most important characters. That being said, we are going to move into another important Dragon Age character who was made bisexual in Dragon Age 2, but I believe in his first appearance in Dragon Age Awakening, although not romanceable, I believe he was actually straight, because he does flirt with a female warden a lot, and that is Anders. Anders is a sad case in the fact that romanceable, he is a really romantic character. However, inconsistent writing really hurts him in the fact that he's a nice and funny guy at points, but he's also like a lunatic mage at others, and it's really hard to, like, the later you get into the game, even as a romanceable as a romance option, it is very hard to see that nice, funny guy that was there in the beginning. He kind of gets erased. And then with the end game, his, like, possible, like, death at your hands, whereas it does make for an interesting story. As a romance, it kind of does leave a lot to be desired, and even if you don't have to kill him, sparing him either way, it just kind of seems he betrayed your trust.